Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the How to Enable Meaningful Patient Contribution to Ethic Review, hosted by EUPATI, moderated by Giorgio Barbareschi from EATG. My name is Emily, and I'm your BT Event Manager. During the presentation, your lines will remain on listen only. If you do require assistance at any time, or you do wish to add any feedback, please press star then 0 on your telephone, and a coordinator will be happy to assist you and open your line. You may also submit web questions throughout the presentation by clicking on the Q&A tab, which is indicated with a question mark. Type your question and click Send to all panelists. These will be addressed in the Q&A session. I would like to advise all parties that this conference call is being recorded for replay purposes. And now I'd like to hand the call over to Giorgio. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Emily, and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining the second EUPATI webinar on how to enable meaningful patient contribution to ethical review. I'm particularly pleased to see that there has been a lot of applicants to participate to the webinar. We reached the number of 110 potential participants, so we hope that there will be still more person joining the call during the webinar. I will start introducing to the first introduction. Sorry, it seems that I cannot. I'm trying to go to the next slide. Okay, so the purpose of this webinar and what is the context of this webinar. It is within the framework of Work Package 7 of EUPATI. And in Work Package 7, we are responsible of the development of future topics and the sustainability of the project. One of the deliverable 7.2 is developed indeed in collaboration with other work packages, and particularly this topic, the interaction between patients and ethics committees, has been done in collaboration with Work Package 2. So the objective of this deliverable is to provide guiding principles on the interaction between patients, organizations, and other stakeholders. And particularly now the focus for this webinar is to look at interaction between patients and ethics committees. Previously to this webinar, we had in September 2014 EUPATI roundtable organized at the EFGCP which was on best practice of guidelines of interaction between patient representatives and ethics committees. This included a number of experts. We had 14 experts invited, and we tried to highlight a number of topics of relevance for these issues, which led to the preparation of the current webinar. And we really like to have during this discussion that will take place later today an input from the audience. That's because in the beginning of 2016, we are due to provide a document on guidance of interaction, which will be submitted and recognized also by other patients' organizations and the other stakeholders. So why we are talking about the interaction with ethics committees? Because revision of the clinical trial directive has been submitted to the European Commission, and the result has been that there are recommendations to have at least one lay person in the assessment of applications, but it's still really unclear what is the role for actual patients, whether they will be included or not, and what is their position within the ethics committees. So I will leave this part to Laurent Souchet with the policy officer of a European Patient Forum, as they have developed a position paper on this regulation. So in this webinar, also in the second part of this webinar, we will have a number of presentations to illustrate the situation in the 5 different countries, and to show that at the moment we don't have homogeneity on how patients are considered for participation in ethics committees. Afterwards, there will be an interactive discussion which will be chaired by Ingrid Klingman, and then we will have the most interactive part where we'll ask direct feedback from the audience. So you can provide feedback in 2 ways. The first has been described as you can put your question in the QA session, and the second one will be through we will present a number of questions and we will ask to answer to the poll. So I'm leaving the floor to Lorraine to explain the position paper that they have produced in response to the ethics committee's regulation. So Lorraine, please.
Yes. Thank you, Giorgio. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to briefly introduce the European Patient Forum position on patient involvement in ethics committee. So the position paper was circulated in advance. Next slide, please. And it was developed during the legislative process, which lasted from 2012 to 2014. And EPF has been engaged in this debate very early on, and our main position on this is that we call for patient involvement in ethics committee to be mandatory, and we also call for guidelines. So next slide, please. So why do we think that patients should be involved in ethics committees? First of all, we believe it's a moral right because patients participate voluntarily to advance medicine, they provide information, and they ultimately have to manage the risk of participating in trials. We also think it's a question of quality. Patient involvement, in our opinion, leads to better trial design and outcome. For example, patient organization can help in identifying practical and logistical issues that can affect patients' participation and dropout rates. Patients' view on risk and benefit is also different from other players, so they can help in ensuring the benefit-risk balance is appropriate from their point of view. They can ensure that documents for informed consent are patient-centered. The European Parliament first supported this, but the text was then watered down in the final negotiation. And on the next slide, you have the exact provision in the regulation. So the article says mainly taking into account the views of laypersons, in particular patients or patient organizations. Now, this is an important point in your view because layperson's perspective is not equivalent to patient's perspective. They are both needed because persons who do not live with a chronic condition do not possess the same experiential knowledges as patients. So, however, since the adoption of the regulation, the informal feedback that we have received at EPF from various stakeholders, including member states, is that there is a general understanding that the regulation as adopted means patients will need to be included in ethics review in some way, and we think this is a good basis on which to further develop recommendations. In our position, we had also called for guidelines at EU level to define how patient involvement should be implemented, drawing upon existing good practices in this area, and also addressing capacity building and the role of patient organizations. And indeed, to ensure that patient involvement is meaningful and works in practice, there are a number of practical questions which need to be addressed. I won't go into this in detail now, but some of these quick questions are on my last slides. So this recommendation to have guidelines wasn't taken on board either. And now EPF is calling for monitoring carefully the implementation of the regulation to ensure that ethics committees really do ensure that participation of patients alongside laypersons. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. This was really helpful to introduce the discussion. We still have 5 presentations from speakers from different countries. So the first one is Andrea Heckenberg, and she's a senior staff of the Ethics Committee's Office of Vienna Medical University. And she is also co-chair of the EUPATI ethics panels, and she's going to give us the perspective from Austria. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you, Giorgio, and thank you for the invitation. Let me first give you a little background information on our ethics committee. This is on the situation in Austria. We have 27 ethics committees in Austria. Some of them are only ethics committees of very small hospitals. As a matter of fact, only 7 out of these ethics committees are qualified to assess multi-center medicinal product studies. Amongst those, being the largest medical university in Austria, we also have the largest ethics committee, let's say. We assess about 1,000 studies per year, and about 15% of those are drug trials. So every month in our meeting we assess about 10 to 15 medicinal product studies. The composition of the ethics committees in Austria is regulated by various legal documents, which are the Hospital Act, the Medicines Act, Medical Devices Act, and in our case also the University Act. And according to those, the composition of an ethics committee is, like you see on these slides, well, of course, medical experts of all disciplines. I'm not going to go into that, that's clear. Then we have members of the nursing staff, of the pharmacy, a member with ethical expertise, lawyer, statistician, and then we have various lay members, which would be senior citizen representative of an organization of people with disabilities, and then, importantly, something that is called very vaguely a member of an organization representing patients. So this leaves room to interpretation. How we are handling it, we do not have really the situation in Austria is we have various self-help groups, and maybe umbrella organizations of those self-help groups for a certain disease, but we do not have a real overall patient organization. So what we are in our case, we have members of the patient advocates sitting in the ethics committee. This, I must say, works very well. We have a very well-established system of patient advocacy in every Austrian province, and our personal experience is very good. We have a person from the patient advocacy sitting on the meeting throughout the whole meeting, on every meeting, giving valuable feedback, especially from the patient side. I do recognize, though, that it's not the same as having patients on the committee. If I can please have the next slide, Georgia. Now, having stated that we do not have patients on our committee, thinking what could be the potential role of the patient in our ethics committee. So, of course, there are study-specific things like, let me first, study-specific issues where the patient could be involved. One very obvious thing is the evaluation of the ICF. If it's understandable, if it says everything there should be, if the length is okay, etc., etc. We know about that. And the other thing where the patient could really contribute is assessing risk and burden of the particular study. What is not, I think, decided in an ethics committee is whether a certain area of research should be prioritized, so to say, political decisions. In practice, it works that way, that every study that comes before us is usually approved after maybe some changes, but it's not, the question is not, is this study to be approved because it's a valuable area of research that should be prioritized or not. So it's really about the specific study. How can we make this study work so it's scientifically and ethically valid? Another more general aspect where patient involvement could be helpful is just giving the ethics committee a stronger voice when it's expressing concern about certain general things. One thing is, again, the poor quality of many ICFs. And the other thing where I think patient input could be very valuable for us is a topic of very strict legal restrictions that are actually meant for protecting patients, but really hinder research and for no apparent reason. One thing that comes to mind is biobanking. People donate their samples to biobanks for research, and then there are in our countries, but I know also in other countries, very strict regulations on what you can do with this, and you have to inform patients if you do get reconsent, if you do other research with these samples. Patients are not allowed, even if they wanted to say, take my samples, I trust you, and do research. So this resulting in overburdening the patient with reconsenting, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing is, for instance, blood draws in healthy children for a control group are completely not allowed in Austria. So if we had patients and people concerned backing us up in our opinion that those are things that are too restrictive and really hinder valuable research, that would be extremely helpful. There are many other examples for this. Next slide, please. Now, in what way could collaboration with patients work? One way would be external review, taking patients in as external reviewers, like we take medical specialists in as external reviewers before the EC meeting. And then the other way would be, of course, the participation in the EC meeting. And now there's the question. That could be patients with a specific disease. That would, in our case, mean, of course, 15 studies per month, 15 different patients with a specific disease, which is probably very difficult to organize. I don't know. I don't know how this works in other countries. And then there's, of course, the option of the generic patient, so a general patient who presents the patient's view. Well, my question there is, what is the patient's view? Is there any such thing as the patient's view in general? And also generic patients. After 3, 4, 5 times they've been sitting on the ethics committee, are they still patients, or are they just other experts also sitting there? So there's pros and cons for both possibilities, and I think it would be probably in practice somewhere in between, a mixture of both. In any case, for choosing those patients, whether that be a specific patient or a generic patient, we would have to rely on some kind of patient organization who chooses the people or who helps us choose the people, and we would have to really rely on a well-organized network of patient organizations. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Andrea, and thank you for the presentation. It will generate a number of questions, I'm sure, that they will keep for the second part of the webinar. In the meantime, I would like to introduce Kristen Holm-Kulvik. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. She's the chair of the Department of Clinical Research at the Institute of Regional Health Research at the Faculty of Health, University of Southern Denmark. And she has also very much experience with working in both the regional and the national ethics committees. So without further ado, I will let you to present your part on Denmark, Kristen.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk at this webinar. You can just go on to the next slide, please. And just like Andrea, I have chosen to start out with giving you an overview of the Danish system, We have had health research ethics committees since 1980, and they were voluntary to start out with, but now for many years they have been put down by law. The latest one is from 2011. And the Danish system focuses on biomedical research only. So registry research, interviews, questionnaire studies, and certain biobank studies are exempted from this law, which is, as I understand it, at least a bit special in comparison to some other countries. Our review ethics committees are coupled up with our policy-led administrative regions that are given the task of running the hospital systems, and Denmark have 5 of these. And this means that there are no institutional review boards at all in Denmark. They're all regional ethics committees that are put down and sustained by the administrative regions and by the policy boards, you might call it, that leads these regions. We have between 1 and 6 committees per region, depending on how much research is going on, and we have 1 national committee. And the regional committees are doing the reviews of projects. The national committee is the point of complaints, oversees the work in the regional committees, and we review projects with regard to brand new technologies and new treatment modalities, and especially difficult ethical issues in order to make guidelines that can be used in all the regional committees so that we streamline the treatment of these, instead of having many different ways of treating difficult new types of research. Next slide, please. And those who are represented in the committees are, when we start out with the regional committees that are established by the political system, there we have 7, 9, or 11 members, depending on how many projects we review. And there is a majority of lay members. There is always 1 more lay member than researcher, and the lay members are politicians. And in the National Committee, we have 13 members who are appointed by the Minister of Health. And here we have, at least now, more researchers and professionals than we have lay members. So we don't have official patient representatives invited, you might say, but it is an increasing focus in Denmark that we should be more active in involving patients and patient organizations and also caregivers in, for example, strategy boards, those who are trying to set up research strategies in different hospitals and so on. So I think it might be coming. Next slide, please. The questions we were handed out about whether patient involvement is always needed. As I said, there is no specific requirement in Denmark to include patient representatives, but it is my experience that lay members often function as such, because they have this awareness of whether they can understand the material that has been written to the patients, and they are really the people who complain about poor information material, poor consent forms, and so on. And I would like to say also that since we include only senior researchers and then the politicians, there are of course also some of these people who have experiences with being patients and chronic patients also. So they also draw on these experiences in the committees. I can see that. The second question was about who should be invited, and just like Austria, I think inviting patients with specific diseases for specific projects could turn out to be a really logistic nightmare. But when inviting generic patients, we need to be very aware of whether these are able to kind of rise above their own disease and keep a focus for all patients. And it's my experience in the hospitals that have part in my department that this is actually possible. If you select carefully and explain the task carefully, patients are fully aware of the fact that they are representing all patients and not only those with the specific disease they have themselves. And when they are aware of this and work like that, they are really come up with valuable contributions to research and research strategies. And with regard to which characteristics the invited patients should have, I'm really not prone to say either one or the other, but I would say not necessarily a member of a patient organization, because I think the focus should not be on kind of political patient organization work. It should be more generic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I will move now to the Netherlands with Bob Wilfert, who is a professor in clinical documentation in the study Drug Regulatory Affairs at the University of Bonn, but is also professor at the University of Groningen. Most importantly, is Deputy Chairman Clinical Pharmacologist from the Medical Ethics Committee in Assen and in the Committee of Friesland in the Netherlands. Welcome, Bob.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Next slide, please. We'll first give a short introduction how the system with the ethics committee is working in the Netherlands, because in the Netherlands the competent authority hardly plays any role in the judgment of the trials. The ethics committee both judge the ethic aspects as well as the scientific content, or the quality of the trial. And in the Netherlands we have about 25 ethics committees, and the ethics committee I'm working in Assen is judging about 100 drug studies a year, and is the biggest in the Netherlands. But we are especially working in the phase 1 trials. But I'm supposed to know, my first slide please, I'm supposed to give an introduction of how in the Netherlands is dealt with patients, and we have a requirement in the accredited ethics committees that there should be a representative for the trial participant /volunteer, so also for the patients. And the task is that he or she guards the interest from the trial participant, and is also considering the balance between risk and burden and what is the added value of the trial. And it is especially to prevent that people who are only interested in science are discussing what will be done and what not, so also to give a balance between scientific and societal needs. And therefore, a lay person is required in the accredited ethics committees. Next slide, please. The regulation of the Netherlands says about this lay person that he should have a title of experience, and that is represented that he or she should have at least 5 years of job experience, paid or unpaid. And he or she should be able to have an independent judgment of medical scientific research from the perspective of the participant volunteer. And that, for instance, means that he or she should not be involved in performing medical scientific research, should not have a profession in healthcare, because representatives of healthcare we already have in our ethics committee, and should not be a representative of a patient organization. I will come back on that later. And if it is an institutional review board, because we have institutional review boards and independent review boards, in an institutional review board, the person should not be working in this institution, so to be sure of independence. Next slide, please. So, how about the relation between the patient representative, so the layperson, and patient organizations? In the Netherlands, in the regulation, the people are afraid of influence of lobbying of industry, and therefore they say it may be a member of a patient organization. It may also, the person may also have a function, but he may not represent the patient organization. So he must be able to have an independent, unbiased judgment on a study. So that should be an independent position. And if I look to my experience with the role of the layperson in the ethics committees I'm working in, then it is an important part is always to judge quality of the ICFs, of the patient-informed consent forms, because it's always a struggle to get them readable. And also we have, for instance, nurses who also look what is the impact on the patient. And we have also an ethicist who also looks to the quality of the patient information. So if I'm thinking about should this patient, this lay person, should that be a patient in one of the ethics committees I'm working in, it is indeed a patient, but only from one illness, of course. And we are also judging, for instance, research in healthy volunteers. So I don't know, and maybe it is a nightmare to have a patient for every type of illness, because in one session of an ethics committee you may have different kind of patients. But it may be important to have a lay person who can represent different kinds of patients, and maybe the patient organizations can help in give information to these representatives in the ethics committee. That's what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you very much, Bob. We are now moving on to Spain, and Emma will explain us what is the situation regarding the organization of ethics committees in our country, and also the participation of patients, how it's regulated. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Giorgio. Could you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this second webinar of EUPATI. Next slide, please. Okay. In this slide, I want to answer Giorgio's question. The questions. So, for the first question, if patient representation always is needed in ethics committees in Spain, say is not required yet for our regulation, but it will be mandatory from April or May in 2015, because a new regulation is coming into force. So then patient representative will be mandatory for all ethics committees in Spain. To the second question about what patient representative should be invited to be part of the ethics committee, our regulation will say that any patient or member of any patient organization could be included. So about the third question and characteristic of this patient, just say that in our ethics committee opinion, we think he should not be a member of patient organization because of being could have some kind of conflict of interest. We don't think neither it should be an expert, but we think it should be a person with a high level of motivation, also interest of participating in the ethics committee. Having the availability should be very important. Also, to review all information consent prior to the ethics committee meeting, and also attending the meetings of the ethics committee. For example, our ethics committee is having 2 meetings per month, and we spend about 5 or 6 hours in each meeting. Also, empathy is an important characteristic for this person, education, not non-specific education in respect of on biomedical research or medicine or healthcare, but yes, a level of education to understand and to have a good comprehension skills. Next slide, please. I want to share with you our experience with our patient in the ethics committee, because in Spain we still have a very little experience with patients in ethics committee, as it is not mandatory yet, and only about 2 or 3 ethics committee we are incorporating these patients into the ethics committee. And just to say, she's a retired woman. She joined us just 6 months ago, so it's a very recent experience. She's a person with more than 30 years of experience in communication, publicity, and market research. And she was introduced to the ethics committee by a hospital physician that know we were looking for this patient representative. We had an interview with her, with the commission of the ethics committee. We informed her about the ethics committee expectation, about what we think it should be her involvement. And also we were giving her information about regulatory and the ethics committee function and how we are working, our procedures. Then she accepted, and then the hospital director announced her appointment. Next slide, please. Okay, about her role and contribution. Telling that our procedure in the ethics committee is to provide her with a protocol summary and also the informed form consent prior, about 10 or 7 days prior to the meeting. What the ethics committee is expecting from this person is to reflect the views of society as well as those of patients, but not for a particular disease or patient, but for the general, for all patients, I would say. And about her contribution, I'm going to some details. She has confirmed us that she is reading the informed consent form prior to reading the protocol summary. She doesn't read the protocol summary because she wants to confirm her fully understanding of the trial just based on that document. She is suggesting changes in the specific expression and also a sentence of the informed consent. She always reminds the ethics committee that there is a patient behind any disease. So, and then we have to treat this patient correctly. That because members of ethics committee normally, sometimes we are too used to this terminology used, that sometimes she thinks is aggressive and difficult for the patient to understand. She thinks a structure of informed consent and sometimes complicated because objective or methodology and also legal requirements are together in the same paragraph, and also with non-clinical trials investigators in biomedical research. Usually she thinks that the forms are having a lot of copy and paste approach. And next slide, please. Just the last slide to speak about our perception about her contribution in these few months, as I told you. We think is very important, is valuable, and is normally approved and respect, and we include her contributions in our informs. but also sometimes her inputs are discussed, because we think the changes she proposed to the ethics committee sometimes can hinder informating clearly the patient about the fact that he or she is accepting joining a clinical research. So we are aware about the therapeutic misconception. And also we explain her sometimes that changing structure of informed consent is not always easy, because especially when it goes against some sponsored SOPs or structures in the informed consent. And that's all I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to you, Emma. Before opening to the discussion panel, we have the last presentation, and we are taking a slightly different perspective, because the presenter is Giulio Maria Corbelli. Is a member of the Plus, an Italian network of LGBT people living with HIV. Is also a member of the European AIDS Treatment Group and chair of the European Community Advisory Board. He has been part of the ethics committees at the National Institute of Infectious Disease, Lazzaro Spallanzani in Rome. So please, Giulio, I would like to hear your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. So I very briefly would like to introduce the situation in Italy, where according to the rules from the Ministry of Health, there must be at least one representative of voluntary sector or an organization in defense of patients within the ethics committee. But the rules of the Ministry of Health also state that all the members of the ethics committee must be expert, must have a documented knowledge and experience about clinical trials. So I think that in general, the ideal thing should be to have a patient representative within the ethics committee who is also an expert or a person who knows very well what's going on in a clinical trial. It is very difficult to have an idea about whether this is happening actually in the ethics committee in Italy. As far as I can understand, because there is no coordination in Italy among ethics committees, so it is very difficult to have a very comprehensive image of what's happening. As far as I can understand, the patient representative is always there, and there is always a patient as a member of the ethics committee, but I have no idea about what the role of this presence is there. Next slide, please. So my personal experience, I joined the ethics committee of the National Institute for Infectious Disease Spallanzani in Rome, where I actually am a patient there, because I have been diagnosed with HIV in '97. So I was there at the Spallanzani as a patient. So I contacted directly the ethics committee, because I wanted to be part of that. I built a certain knowledge about my disease and my health condition, so I thought I could share this knowledge within the work of the ethics committee. Of course, at the Spallanzani, there is not only research going on about HIV, but also hepatitis C or hepatitis B and A, or other sexually transmitted infections, or also tuberculosis or bacterial infections and anything else. So very often I have to study clinical trials which are not related to my own health condition. What I do there, I am maybe in a peculiar situation, because I studied a lot about the infectious diseases and HIV in particular. So I can bring some kind of contribution there. I can read a clinical trial protocol and usually understand it rather well. I can have an idea about how an ideal clinical trial protocol should be written and how the procedure should be. So I can say something about the procedures and all the rules within the clinical trials. But I also, of course, read the informed consent, and usually I provide some suggestions and comments about that. Next slide, please. So the last question was, what are the most important characteristics for the patient representation in the ethics committees? And a lot has already been said by other speakers. I usually I agree very much with what Bob said before, that it is not necessary that the member should not be, the patient should not be a member, can be a member of a patient organization, but it is not necessary. This is not necessary, and it should not be, he or she should not be representing the patient organization within the ethics committee. He's there as a patient, as a representative of the patients as a whole. So, but I also think that it is important for the patient to be connected with what's going on in the community of the patients. So what are the experiences of other patients, what are the problems most frequently raising on, and so on. So I think that it is very important for him or she or her to be to have access also to the information, so also to scientific information, to be constantly updated about the last informations. One very practical thing is that a meaningful involvement in the work of the ethics committee can be very time-consuming. Studying clinical trial protocols or informed consent and trying to understand all the things can really take a lot of time. So a person with a full-time work probably can have some troubles in doing things in a proper way. That's my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giulia. And on this last note, I will open the discussion panel. I will invite Ingrid Klingemann to chair the discussion within the panelists. I think we have collected a quite comprehensive picture of different frameworks within the European context, although there is kind of discontinuity on how to work to include patients in ethics committees. Ingrid? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be able to participate in this webinar and to try to pull together your questions and some answers, hopefully, and especially also to enable a discussion amongst you in the audience as well. We have tried to find out how best to handle that, because we were not so sure how many people would really participate in this webinar. We were not sure how attractive this topic is for a relatively broad audience. As you all know, our webinars are primarily meant for our network members, so we assume that you are all in the one or other way interested in education of patients in the medicines development process, in the involvement approach for patients in the medicines development process, and the overall EUPATI questions. So I'm very glad that we have so many participants now in this webinar. And what we try, as Giorgio has already explained at the beginning, what we try with this webinar is to facilitate the discussion on a particular topic, and in this case on this particular topic within our network, and give you an opportunity to raise questions that are burning for you, but also to give us an opportunity to learn from your experience, because as George has also explained, we are supposed to prepare a guidance document on patient involvement in the ethical review in future, and this task is triggered by the fact that in the clinical trial regulation, in the new law that we are all going to face in Europe, this topic has been raised, has been discussed, but ultimately, let's say, put into on the parking lot or in a corner and left to the member states to figure out what they want to do with it. And that means that we had this discussion to some degree in some countries, and as you have heard now from a selection of countries, there are countries where this was already actively taken up. There are other countries who are only starting to have this discussion, but every country seems to do that on their own, and there is no cohesive approach to this overall topic on a European basis. And we think it is, in EUPATI, it is high time to raise this topic and to come to some agreement on what would be the best way forward, because what we have heard very clearly is there is to some degree a conflict between the type of person that we would like to see in this ethical review. We have already now and very broadly accepted the need for a lay person. The argument is also that more or less earlier or later every person in an ethics committee becomes a patient as well, so has also a patient head on. We have countries where there is clearly an insisting attitude that it should be a lay person and not necessarily a patient. We have countries where it is meant to be, let's say, a generic patient. We call it generic patient, meaning being a patient in a patient role, but being involved also in discussion on protocols in other areas of diseases. We have the discussion about the patient representative, and there we have a very broad spectrum. And I must say, for me, also a number of interesting and surprising attitudes or suspicions about patient organizations that came out also partly here in this presentation that you have heard now. So on one hand, the question is, should it be, if it's not involved with a patient organization, should it be a person that is a representative of a patient organization? And if it is a representative, should it then be, so to say, somebody who is really suffering from the disease, or should it be somebody who is a political representation, so to say, from that organization? There are obviously very different attitudes, different pros and cons. We have also organizational problems if we would require a patient presenting a particular disease, and these ethics committees have 10, 15 protocols to review in a session how to organize that. Ethics committees also have problems to identify suitable patients, and also not many patients are willing to do that enormous amount of work that Giulio has explained. So we have lots of things to define and figure out what would be the best way forward, and what is achievable, and what would really help most our intention to make sure that the protocols, that the recommendation from the ethics committees is important, valuable, relevant for the patients in the clinical trial. And to make sure that even if we have here now a difficulty to get all your points presented because we are simply too many in this webinar, we will have at the end a poll. We will ask you 3 questions, and we want you to answer these questions. And the 3 questions, so that you can mentally prepare, will be: is patient representation always needed in committees? Principal question. The second question is, which patient representative should be invited to be part of the ethics committees? That's about this question of generic patient or patients with medical condition. And the third question is, what should be the characteristic of patient representative? So these will be the 3 questions that we will ask at the end, and we will show you then at the end of this webinar what this all thinks about those 3 questions. So, but coming back now to the questions that you have, there was a very first question from Kathy Oliver. Kathy, you asked the question about whether, when we talk about patient involvement, whether this is also meaning caregivers. In our roundtable discussion that we had in September last year, we clearly said yes, because we need to make sure that also patients are, or let's say diseases are represented where the patients themselves cannot participate in the ethical review, but at least their position, their needs, their requirements for support need to be potentially then also represented, and that is of course something that has to be done by caregivers. So I hope that that we can agree that when we mean patients, that also includes caregivers. Then there was one question specifically now to Andrea. Andrea talked about patient advocates are participating in Austrian ethics committees and they give valuable feedback. But the question was really, you talked about patient advocates. And you said that they are not patients themselves. Could you elaborate a bit more on that, what you meant? So what patient advocates are these then?
Well, those is an organization representing patients in all legal and other issues they've got here, lawyers and people like this, Patientenanwalt. So I suppose the correct, it's not patients, it's just a group where you come to, an institution where you can go to as a patient if you feel you have a certain concern. That could include research, that could include how you were treated in the hospital, etc. Somebody who represents you in a more professional manner than you can do it yourself.
Oh, thank you very much.
Did I make that clear? Yeah.
Yes. Oh, thank you. So there was another question from Dimitrios Athanasiou. Hello, Dimitrios. Nice to have you here online. And you would like to ask how the ethics committees in the various countries can cope rare or ultra-rare diseases. That goes certainly in line or in the direction of the topic of how representative can a patient with a disease be for all patients, and especially then for the rare patients. Who from the panel would like to answer that? So how do you deal with patient representativeness in rare or ultra-rare diseases?
Ingrid, if I can express my opinion, this is Giulio speaking.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think this is a very, very important and concerning point. It is almost impossible to have a patient, an expert patient about the rare disease just because they are rare, unfortunately. So it is really difficult to have direct experience of that disease. I also think that some aspects of the involvement of a person as a patient within the clinical research have some common points which can be understood by a person who is living with a disease, even if it is different. So there are some kind of differences which, according to me, is impossible to have them solved. On the other hand, we can provide some kind of comments of participation which can be important for the patients involved in this research area.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comment from the panel on that?
Yes, Lauren speaking.
Yeah.
I think that something that could help with rare and ultra-rare patients is to have a database of EU patient organizations in order to have different diseases and experts in a database. For example, the European Medicines Agency has a database of expert patients for its work, so it's feasible.
Okay, so, and you think we could, ethics committees could draw from this database, but how, so these names are publicly available?
So this would be available to national authorities and researchers, perhaps not publicly available because it would pose a data protection issue, but this could be available to national authorities.
Okay, so that means ethics committees who would be in need for such type of direct patient support would have to communicate with their national competent authorities and ask for, yeah, let's say facilitation to get into contact with these people.
I think this could be a solution.
That could be a solution, okay. Any other comments?
Maybe I would like to, because I think that in our ethics committees in the Netherlands, we have physicians, we have ethicists, and lay person. And I think that in this context, it should be possible to translate the position also of the ultra-rare and the rare diseases. And that you, especially if the experience of these patients is not readily available, I think a physician, an ethicist, and then the lay person should be able to judge how to make the balance between risk and benefit.
Okay, so you think this combination of the ethicist and the layperson should at least to a sufficient degree represent the situation of a patient with this ultra-rare disease as a compromise, so to say, in the judgment of benefits and risk.
Exactly, and that's also why our ethics committee, we spent very much time to be sure that, for instance, also the layperson and the ethicist also understand the medical situation. We work with pre-advices, so before our meeting, everybody can read in an understandable language what are the main points in the protocols we are discussing. And in that way, I also try to involve as much as possible my layperson also when it is medically a bit more difficult. And also for the ethicist, it's important to understand what is medically going on.
Yeah. I mean, especially in rare diseases, it is quite difficult to imagine what the disease really means for the patients on a daily basis. And I think especially in those protocols, it is very, very important that the protocol is very much data generation from this patient population. So personally, I'm not really sure whether even with the best intention, an ethicist and a layperson can imagine what it means to live with that indication. So I think that topic probably requires more discussion and more in-depth review of also even the question whether involvement of patients with ultra-rare diseases is in the ethical review of a particular protocol is more burning than, let's say, in a disease where people can more easily imagine what it means to live with that disease. I mean, a lot of people know what it means to live with hypertension or with diabetes or with adipositas or other more general diseases. And I think it's certainly a difference that we have to take into consideration here. Okay, is there somebody else from the panel who would like to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I would like to say something.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Andrea, you can go on.
No, I'm waiting.
Okay. Well, this is Kirsten, and I would like to agree with Bob that sometimes we quite simply have, at least in the present committees, to make do with what we have. And of course, that is also why we are a number of people trying to discuss this. But this was not so much what I wanted to. I would also like to say that in the questions from Dimitrios, there is also mention of fast developing diseases with short life expectancy and how and their perspective. And personally, from my experience, these patients do not want to spend their last time working in an ethics committee, but their view is actually the view that could be, for example, expressed by caregivers or family, spouses, children, and so on. And I think we should be perhaps more focused on these people's view also, because they have been present. They've been seeing what is going on, especially if these patients are involved in projects. And we all know, for example, cancer patients who come where they have recurrence for the X time, and there is nothing left but experimental treatment. And how is that actually experienced? Because we do know that a lot of these or not a lot, but some of these patients are killed by these experimental treatments instead of by their disease. And I think it's in that case, it's actually very, very important that we get some answers from the caregivers. How was this for the patient and the family in the last time?
Yeah. I fully agree with you. That is something that is extremely important and extremely relevant, and therefore I think the topic of caregivers in that role is absolutely something that we have to take into consideration, and that should be a given that this would also be an eligibility criteria, for example. One thing that has obviously been seen by Russell Wheeler, and which I also must say I share with you, this impression that there is in ethics committees to some degree, on one hand, the fear that it is, as you just said, Kirsten, it's an organizational nightmare to find enough patients or the suitable patients then for a particular trial for each protocol. That is a very difficult organizational task. But there seems also to be a certain fear that a concerned patient may have too much of a, I don't know, perhaps not the right word, but saying lobbying attitude, or that there's a certain type of bias in this person concerning the defense of his case and his needs in comparison to, let's say, the overall attempt of an ethics committee to be unbiased, objective, neutral, and to some degree distant in the assessment. How would the panel see that conflict? With whom do we want to start? Andrea, do you want to take the first shot again on that topic?
Gladly, yes. Well, actually, I don't really get this idea of a bias, because this is not the place where you decide which kind of studies should be prioritized or anything. It's the practical life of an ethics committee. Is you get a certain study has been designed and planned, is put before you, and then it's for us to decide whether the design is sound, the statistics are sound, the burden to the patient, etc., etc. But in what way? I mean, and then you invite a patient along to look at this with you. In what way would bias come in here? It's not about should we do this study or should we prioritize something else. It's there already. So I don't really get it where the bias would come in.
Bob, what do you think?
Yes, you are right. I would like to react. I think that the main fear in the Netherlands is that, for instance, if a patient organization for a certain disease has a big grant from a certain industry, that trials from that industry cannot be judged independently. And for instance, as I saw in one of the presentations, that the SOPs of the sponsor play a role in the information of the patient. I can say that I'm not impressed by their SOPs, because I'm only interested in the patient, because that is why I'm in an ethics committee. I have to defend the patient. And I think it is important, if a trial is submitted, then there are a lot of points where you can change it. You can look how much burden it is, how many comparisons are necessary. There are a lot of points where you can affect the performance of the trial. And I think that there may be another interest from the sponsor, which can be paying the patient organization, so that is the nightmare. And if you have an independent person, I think that is the only fear, nothing else.
Okay, so you think this is about let's say the potential financial conflict that a representative from a patient organization might have if that patient organization is supported by industry grants, which is in many cases an absolute must patient organizations, because otherwise there is no funding at all and they cannot do their work. That this is a principal problem that patient organizations have in many cases if they are not, for example, in some countries that exist, but the majority of patient organizations need to find ways to find activities, and of course pharma companies who support these patient to that environment and to enable involvement. So I think we have here certainly a principal problem to our recommendations then, and have to see how we can phrase that and how we can enable the that this argument is in real life then not going to be a hindering force. Emma, you have also you have made in your ethics committee the decision that it by definition should not be somebody from a patient organization. Would you want to re-emphasize on that?
Yes, well, we have, yes, thank you, Ingrid. Yes, we have also the same opinion, and I think it's also in the line that Bob has said. I think our ethics committee is also afraid about the independence of a patient that comes from a patient organization. So for that fear, I mean, pharmaceutical industry could be helping this organization and also in some way trying to convince this organization about their product or about their trials. I also want to mention something that Bob has said about the SOPs of the sponsor, because it was in my presentation. I know independence of the ethics committee is quite important, but also we all know that at least in Spain we have also by regulatory and structure that the informed consent have to have, and also the information that pharmaceutical industry must include in their informed consent, and it's not always easy to remove some information about legal requirement or policy, or is not easy. That was I was trying to do that to say. I mean that this patient could think that she would change all the structure of the informed consent, but it's not easy to ask for these changes when they change most of the structure or most of the content of the informed consent, because she's sometimes trying to change. She thinks that informed consent are too long. We also think they are too long, but she wants us to give other options, about giving a summary to the patient and then include other annexes to this first resume of the informed consent.
Okay, so that leads then to the question, in how far can the voice of the patient be really transferred into, or translated into action, in how far can this advice be taken on board? And I think there you open a complete new range of questions, because of course it does not make sense if we have a patient represented, or a patient in the ethics committee, and they contribute, but their contribution is not heard. On the other hand, the question is it just one voice like all the others, or is that the dominant voice, or is that a veto voice? I think also this point has to be discussed. I'm afraid we are not able to go into this discussion here, but thank you very much for raising it, Emma. That is a topic that we really, really have to think about as well.
Yeah.
I would like to give, I know, Kirsten, I have overlooked you, but at the moment we have only 2 more minutes before we need to go into the poll, and I would like to give the word either to Julio or to Lorraine to present again their view on the issue of patient organization involvement versus generic patient or patient not related to a patient organization. From your experience, why would it be a plus to have a representative from a patient organization sitting in the ethics committee?
If I may, this is Giulio speaking. I would like to comment about the fear of independence from a patient member who is also a member of an ethics committee, who is also a member of a patient organization, because I think that also the researchers who are sitting at the ethics committee can have some kind of indirect liaison with the pharmaceutical companies. So I don't think that this is something which is strongly affecting the independence of the patient representative at the ethics committee. As I said before, I don't see the strong need to have a patient who is representing a patient organization. He must have some kind of connections with the community of patients, but I don't think it is necessary for him to be a member of or more a representative of a patient organization.
Okay, and what would you say?
So I would say that we should not be prescriptive on whether it should be, we think that all patients are experts, so we don't think we should be prescriptive that it should be somebody from a patient organization. But that said, people who are in patient organizations...
I mean, you are fading away, Lorraine. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now it's better, yeah.
Okay. So I was saying that people in patient organizations do have access to a support structure, and they can draw on also the experience of fellow patients. It's very hard for one patient representative to present the view of all patients, so we have to consider that. But at the same time, I think because it's difficult to find patients to sit on the ethics committee, we shouldn't be prescriptive. That said, all patients who participate to ethics committees should receive some sort of support and capacity building.
You prepared more time or foreseen more time for discussions than last time. We are coming already towards the end of this webinar. Here, webinar is giving a flavor of the complexity of this topic and the need to really, really work in our multi-stakeholder environment. And I would like to invite all of you to actively participate in the drawing in our drawings, in providing us with input, providing us with ideas, suggestions to make this topic really, this guideline really helpful and relevant, so that we have also a chance that it is taken.
Ingrid, sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Yes. Oh, are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah? Can you hear me now? Okay,
yes.
sorry. Okay, so I think what we need to achieve now is working all together on this guidance, but for at the moment an idea of where we stand with our opinions, I would now like to give back the microphone to Giorgio and our technical help, so that we can go to the poll, please. Very much,
Thank you very much
for
Ingrid.
your active contributions and support, and we will come back to all your questions that we have now not been able to answer, and try to raise that in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much, Ingrid, also for keeping up all the discussion on this. Indeed, the focus was on these three important questions. Unfortunately, we don't have the possibility to have a broader way to discuss this, but we will really appreciate if you could give your input. So we will open the poll in order to see what is your opinion about these three questions. So the first question, also based on what has been discussed today. So the first question is patient representation always needed in ethics committees? So on the right, you can see that there are three questions, and you can click on yes or no for the first question. The second question is, which patient representative should be invited to be part of ethics committees? Would you see as a representative more a generic patient, or a patient with medical conditions which are relative to the study that is involved too? The third question regard the characteristic of the patient. So what should be the characteristic of patient representative? Should it be a person who is non-affiliated to patients' organizations, a member of patients' organizations, or the affiliation is irrelevant? Please select one of the answers for each question, and we should be able to have the results in a few seconds. I will keep the poll open still for 20 seconds to leave you the time to select your answer. Okay. Can we close the poll and see the results, please?
Results are now coming for you, Giorgio.
Okay. So thank you very much. So regarding the first question, is patient representation always needed in ethics committees? So 58% of the participants have said yes, and 6% have said no. We have also to consider that 36% didn't give an answer. The second question, which patient representatives should be invited to be part of ethics committees? We have 25% who would like to see a generic patient be part of the ethics committees. 40% would prefer a patient with medical condition from the clinical trial. The third question, what should be the characteristic of patient representative? 4% say that shouldn't be affiliated to any patient organization. 13% would prefer patient members of patients' organization. 47% they say that it's relevant, although 36% didn't answer the question. So based on this this first poll, we could try to draw the first conclusions is that there is a general preference to have patient representative in ethics committees. Is not really, there is some more preference to have patients or caregivers with a medical background of the clinical study, and the preference should be for member of a patient's organization. Although we have to consider, is it relevant whether the patient is part of a patient's organization or not? Ingrid, would you like to?
Yeah, I think this is very, very interesting. Also that 36% have not voted at all, which means there is still a quite large number of undecided people in our audience, which is also enlightening. And I think also the distribution here shows that we have honestly a very different viewpoint on this overall topic. I think the only real clear message is, yes, at least participation round here, that there is really a need for patient representation, and I take this as a let's say a plea to EUPATI to continue to work on this and try to find solutions for it. But the conditions, the criteria, the whens and ifs, that is clearly something that requires much more work, much more consensus building, much more working out in detail what the conditions could be, weighing the pros and cons. So I think, Giorgio, we have a very difficult task preparing these guidelines and making sure that we find something that is really acceptable for the vast majority of people involved in this topic and interested in that topic. But we have now, I think, a good starting point, and I'm absolutely sure that we will get back to you in the near future on further details, further questions, further proposals, and would love to keep going ongoingly your feedback so that we can be better sure that what we are going to propose is really something that you want to support and that you find really helpful, and that ultimately is achieving what we want, which is ensuring that ethics committees are in the best possible position to provide patients with, let's say, the protection and the support that ethics committees want to give to patients participating in clinical trials. So that would be my conclusion from my end, Giorgio.
Thank you very much. And I also would like to add that indeed we really tried to get your opinion based on these three simple questions, and we found out also during the discussion that the complexity of the issue cannot really be simplified in three questions. This is already a kind of general broad guideline on what is the direction that you should take, but we have to take in consideration also the questions and the comments that have been raised during this webinar, which I think is even more important than just having like statistical information on this topic. So I would like to thank you all the participants for their contribution and for the interest in the webinar. Indeed, we were a little bit afraid that this was a kind of quite broad topic to have this to raise interest within the consortium. I would like to thanks again all the panelists and Ingrid for chairing the discussion and all the support in the preparation of this meeting. Also Ilaria and all the other people who have been behind the preparation of this webinar. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The same to you.
Thank you, Giorgio.
Bye.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
A pleasure.
Thank you to all presenters. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes your conference call for today. You may now disconnect. Thank you for joining, and have a very good day.
Thank you.